Hello, everybody. It's so good to be here with you all tonight to celebrate this incredible book that just came out this week. We are all here to celebrate Miles Morales. Miles Morales, God, I can't get it right. That's how nervous I am to be here with you awesome people and talk about this book, Miles Morales, Shockwaves. My name is Nick Lowe. I am the Spider-Man editor at Marvel Comics. I edit the wonderful Miles Morales comic book we put out. I edit all this amazing Spider-Man. I also edit Runaways and Black Cat and some other awesome stuff. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. We are here to talk about Miles Morales Shockwaves, this graphic novel that just came out this week, and it is so good. It is the first OGN for Miles Morales that we have ever done at Marvel, and it is such a great book. But you don't have to take my word for it. We have a whole incredible panel of people that I'm going to introduce you to in just a minute. But I wanted to thank you all so much for coming here tonight. Thank you for buying the tickets here and for getting Miles Morales Shockwaves. Just so you all know, your signed book plate copies of the book will be mailed out just after this event, and it'll come in about 1 or 2 weeks, just depending on shipping and where you are and all that kind of good stuff. But here's what's going to happen tonight. I'm going to introduce you to an incredible panel, including the authors of this book, another writer who writes one of Miles' books here at Marvel for us, and we're going to all talk about a little bit, and then it'll be your turn to talk as you're going to put stuff in the Q&A, and we're going to answer your questions. Just to get it out there, we cannot talk about any movies or television. I'm getting something that I'm breaking up. Can everyone hear me okay out there? I hope you can all hear me all right. There we are. But we can't talk anything about any movies that might be coming or not coming up, any television shows. That's not what any of us here do. We work on the comics, and even if we did know something, we wouldn't be allowed to tell you because there'd be legal eagles swooping down and grasping us in their talons and tearing us out of the windows. So that's just no, don't even bother asking that stuff because we can't answer it. Enough about me just jibber jabbering. Let's start meeting our panel. So first, I would like to introduce you to Justin A. Reynolds. Justin has always wanted to be a writer. His debut YA novel, Opposite of Always, was an Indies Introduced Top 10 debut and a School Library Journal Best Book of 2019. It's been translated into so many languages. And then he came out with another novel, Early Departures. And that is huge critical acclaim and great reviews. It's been optioned to be a movie. And just as important, Justin is from Cleveland. He co-founded the CLE Reads Book Festival. It takes place in where I am also from. I'm also from Cleveland. And so I'm so excited to talk with Justin. So he still lives in Northeast Ohio, unlike me, who I live in Queens, New York. But he's there. Another thing we have in common is we dance terribly, or so he says. I mean, I think I'm pretty good. Justin, so glad to have you here tonight.
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much. I'm excited about it. And
yes, the book is so good. The book is so good.
I
want to start talking, but I'm going to stop myself, and I'm going to introduce our next panelist. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to talk about our next guy. Pablo Leon drew the heck out of this book. He penciled, ink, colored. He did so much work because he is a visual genius. Pablo is an artist and designer. He has worked for all kinds of people, a lot of animation, Warner Brothers Animation, Oddbot Inc., Bento Box Entertainment, and currently works at Disney TV Animation. But when he isn't changing our lives through animation, he dabbles in comics. He did an amazing story called The Journey, for which he was nominated for an Eisner Award in 2019. And then he descended onto Justin's incredible script to draw Miles Morales Shockwaves. Pablo, welcome to the panel.
Oof, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. That is a way better introduction than I could ever think of about myself.
Don't worry. Once people read this book, you're going to be a household name, and then we won't be able to stop it. We're so glad to have you here tonight with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Up next, we have Danny Lowe. Danny Lowe for those of you who don't know, is a queer Black writer-editor raised in Harlem who currently lives in the Bronx, although some people might say technically Manhattan. But Danny is incredible. They have worked in comic and gaming shops since the beginning of time. I know because I'm older than dirt. And when I used to grab my club and put on my fur pelt and go to the cave, Danny was there checking out the comics for me. Danny has had their short fiction published in Faya, Podcastle, Fireside Nightlight, and now currently writes, amongst other things, Champions at Marvel Comics, which includes Miles Morales on the team, and Ironheart, and Ms. Marvel, and Nova, and so many incredible teen characters that she works on with Luciano Vecchio. You guys are such an amazing team together. And if that's not enough for you, it was just announced that Danny is working with Seth Smith on an OGN called Kicks that just got announced, which is a contemporary quest story with themes of family and friendship and queer romance that features a pair of Black siblings and their best friend who must battle their way from the 5 boroughs of New York City to recover items stolen from their family's magical tailor shop, which, like, that is so cool. Already out of the gates. Everyone, Danny, welcome to this panel.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited. I mean, the second this book was announced and the team was announced, I lost it. So I'm really excited to be here and help celebrate your book birthday.
Oh my gosh. Happy book birthday. Good call, Danny. Now, this book, so as I said, I'm the Spider-Man editor at Marvel, but I did not edit this book. I would steal away to Lauren Bissom's, either when we were in the office, in her actual office, and then once we were pandemicked, I'd make her send me PDFs and I'd read it with bated breath, because this book is so good. Not only does it dive into the core of who Miles Morales is and who his family is, who his dad is, and especially who his mom is and where she is from and where they're from, but it also gives you so much incredible action. So it introduces some new characters to you, and it's so incredible. So I want to dive in with each of you, talk about your history with Miles and what you are interested in and what brought you to this book. So I'm going to start off with Justin. Justin, what was your first experience with Miles Morales?
Great question. First of all, I just want to say again, thank you for having me here. So I was a big fan of Miles. The Ultimate Marvel series is probably where I was first introduced, and then I actually missed originally the Ultimate Fallout issue where he first appeared, but then around the time that the movie came out, I kind of like went back and just found everything and just kind of devoured the entire Miles Morales history. And then, of course, once I got tapped into this project, I dived back in and read everything multiple times.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, it's crazy to think that was almost 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years ago in August that Ultimate Fallout came out. I think Ultimate Fallout 4 it was. Yeah. And then in September that Ultimate Comic Spider-Man, like his first full comic, came out 10 years ago.
That is wild.
Yeah, unbelievable. Now, when you got this assignment, so you went back and you read everything about Miles that was published. How did you get into the headspace of Miles Morales?
Honestly, I kind of felt like I was already in the headspace because I identify with Miles on so many different levels. He's this kind of quippy, fun-loving kid who also is really just trying to figure out his identity and kind of like his place where he kind of belongs, just as a regular human being on the earth. And then that is kind of like couched by this amazing responsibility to act as Spider-Man and be this superhero. And so while, if I was a superhero, I couldn't tell you guys. So I won't say that part of it, obviously. But I definitely identify with Miles in his personal life and his family life, and having 2 strong parents and having kind of like that rich cultural heritage. And then being a kid who kind of finds himself juggling so many different worlds at the same time, but ultimately also just wants to have fun and hang out with his friends, and has all the same like fears and concerns and anxieties that any other young person would have. And so and that I still have. So I was definitely a big fan, like of all of like everything that is Miles. Yeah.
That's so cool. So I need to dive right in about the Cleveland connection. So you are also from Cleveland. Where in Cleveland are you from? Where did you come up at Cleveland?
So I'm like right around I'm not sure you're familiar with like Westlake area.
Oh yeah, I grew up
Yeah.
in Westlake.
Yeah. So, oh, okay, perfect. Like,
Yeah.
look, we're like, we have all these connections. So like,
Yep.
yeah. So right around that area. And now, I'm still like proud to say that I'm hanging out in Cleveland. Right now I spend like most of my time out in Ohio City and, like the
So
Tremont area.
I went to high school in Ohio City at Ignatius, and
Why
I
do we have
love
all the
Ohio City.
connections?
Yeah, it's
Why
unbelievable.
we're
I
basically
grew
the
up in
same
Westlake,
person, Nick.
but it's so cool. And like part of it, one of the things I love of why you're from Cleveland is because Cleveland has such a rich comic book history.
It really does.
Like, between, the creators of Superman and then like some of the greatest comic book writers of all time, you're joining great company, Justin, with like, Bendis and Brian K. Vaughan. Azzarello spent a much time there. But like, I think there's some comics in the water in Cleveland. I think there's something about that there. And can you tell me about the festival that you started in Cleveland too?
Yeah. So 2 years ago, we kind of, I guess prior to that, we kind of realized that there was a kind of the lack of there wasn't an opportunity to have young people kind of gather together and discuss books, and especially the kind of books that truly reflected their lives. And so I wanted to try to bring a whole bunch of people to Cleveland, and one to kind of show people who aren't from Cleveland, like how awesome Cleveland is, and then have young people experience all these authors from across the country who are writing books specifically for them. And so it's for young adults and middle grade primarily. And we did it again, even like virtually. We planned it again, and now we're actually in the midst of planning our third iteration. So we're super excited about it. And it's been so awesome to see the book community rally behind it, especially the young adult and middle grade authors. Without their support, it definitely wouldn't happen. And so I'm so happy that and Cleveland has rallied around it. The turnout is awesome. So yeah, that's Cleveland Reads.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll try to share a link in the chat or something like that later as we go through there. So now that I got my Cleveland questions a little bit out of the way, and we'll come back when we want to talk about like Hex or some other, or the West Side Market or something like that later. But in the meantime, let's dive back. Can you tell us a little bit about the story of Shockwaves and the inciting incident, and a little bit of what people have in store for them when they start reading Shockwaves?
So I think I said like in a tweet recently that my favorite things about Miles is that he has the quips, the thwips, and the heart, and I really stand by that. And so this story takes place shortly after a series of devastating earthquakes takes place in Puerto Rico. And those amazing people there are trying to rebuild their lives and the economy, and also while losing a lot of the things that are important to them. And so I thought about how that would affect the Morales family, specifically Rio. And so this story is about how Miles is attempting to, one, support his mother as she and her family try to navigate this tough time, but also trying to support the community at large of Puerto Rico and trying to be supportive and helpful in ways that are not only practical, but immediate. And so that's kind of the emotional side of it, the backstory of it. But then the other component is that around the same time that all this is taking place, and that Miles is trying to kind of rally the community to support the cause, to provide relief for Puerto Rico, there's some new villains in town, and they seem intent on slowing down Miles and what he's trying to do. And so it was a lot of fun to write. And I think that if you enjoy all the funny things that Spider-Man, that we see with Spider-Man, and if you enjoy kind of all of the action and the super like intense scenes and chase scenes and like swinging through the city, I think you'll enjoy this. Plus, there's some mystery, and there's some intrigue in there, and so yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It's such a great book, and one of the things I love about it, and you talk about, how Miles deals with the news of the earthquake and the devastation of the earthquake. And one of the things I love about it is that the actions that Miles takes in it, he's not just a superhero because he goes out and fights bad guys. And there's plenty of that in this book, and we'll get to that in a second when we start talking about Pablo. But Miles is also shows what a hero he is, and that it's not just one of the things that I love what you do in this book, is you don't have to put a super suit on to help people, and you show that in here, and it's so wonderful. So I thank you for writing this heartfelt and wonderful story.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's a thing that's near and dear to my own heart. Is that the thing I love about Miles? I think what makes most superheroes that we love and cherish so effective is that, first and foremost, as people, they care about what's happening around them, and they're deeply connected to the actual, like, to everyday people. They care about what happens to their neighbor, what happens to the person who has the corner store. They care about the little girl walking on her way to school. They care about everybody. And so because of that, it allows them to do the job of being super heroic even more effectively, because their heart's in it. They care. And we just know we all work harder, and we're stronger when we care about things. And so it's awesome to have, to show the other side of it, in which Miles is really a superhero in his everyday life.
Yeah.
He cares deeply about people and about his community and about people outside of the community.
Yeah, it's so wonderful, and so that's all. That side of it's wonderful. So the helping the normal people, but then you also write some incredible action scenes with some incredible supervillains, and then like, it's one thing to write like Miles swings through Times Square, chasing these villains. It's a whole nother thing to draw that. And so I want to transition over to our good friend Pablo Leon. Pablo, I don't know how you do what you do. What you do is magic, and it is something else entirely. And I would go, so like I said, I didn't edit this book. Lauren Bissam and Caitlin O'Connell were the Marvel side of this book. And I would just drool anytime. Like, the first thing I saw was your character designs, Pablo, that you did, and then pages. What can you tell me we'll get into that too. What was your first experience with Miles Morales? Like, what attracted you to that character and made you want to work on this book?
So my bigger entryway into this was also Spider-Verse. Both the movie, but the comic storyline.
Oh, nice.
Where everything is just merged, and there's just a giant robot. It's amazing. 10 out of 10. I love it.
Awesome. I edited that.
You edited it?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Thanks. So that was my original entry point to him. And then I went back and I started reading some of the trades where he came back. And like you mentioned it, that was like 10 years ago. I had forgotten. Time just moved in all different ways now. So I thought it was like a couple of years ago. So so when Lauren approached me about this project, I was already working on a project that had was very heavy, like cityscape designs. So I was very into that at the time. So she approached me about this, and first of all, it's Miles. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. But also, you got to draw New York, which I was like, yeah, absolutely. I'm really into it right now. I'll draw a building right away if you need me to, right now. But yeah, that was when she approached me to do that. I went back and started checking out where he is at the time. Fortunately, I was not aware that he's now kind of like an adult. So that was a little different for me. But I just very much devoured every media and every comic out there. I watched the TV shows where he's a little bit in there. I read the current series, but overall, like it's similar to what Justin said. For me, it's like I relate to Miles in a sense because obviously we're both Latinos, but there's like a little bit of an awkwardness with Miles that I kind of relate to it, that I don't quite see it with Peter. Of course, Peter is great. It's always been like, the dude he will always be there. He will always be invited to the party. But with Miles, it's like it's a more of a personal connection to that, I thought.
It makes sense, and you bring so much of I can tell of who you are to this book. Like I mentioned before, Lauren and Caitlin shared your character designs, and the world you create in this book visually is amazing. Like no two people look the same. Everyone has their own, like in the real world. That's not always true of all artists and comic book artists, but like everyone has a different body type and look and character to them. Did you what kind of rigor do you bring to yourself as you're designing characters? Like, what do you try to do when you're designing characters like this?
I just mostly want them to feel like they belong to the place, like to where they are in time, in life, or I guess in time. I fully admit that as far as with New York goes, I've always just been a tourist. I'm not even gonna pretend that like I know most of anything else. I just been to Times Square. I'm sorry.
But it's amazing what Google Street View can get you to.
Exactly.
I mean,
So because the way we started this book, we started right when everything went on lockdown, and I went through pictures. I had a plan that at one point maybe I was, because my parents live in the East Coast, like 4 hours away from New York. I could have just gone over there, take a trip, just get some visual library in my head. That didn't work out, so definitely Google Maps was the best thing I could do, which and ended up working out. I hope it worked out.
It worked out so much. I mean, I'll tell you. So I'm very old. I've been at Marvel for 19 years, and in my first years as an assistant editor, there are so many times where an artist would be like, I don't really know what this neighborhood is. So myself, like, I'll go, and I take my little digital camera at the time. Because phones didn't have good cameras then; they had really terrible cameras, and they were like postage. But I'd go and take a picture. But now with Google Maps and Street View and all that kind of stuff, like you can get all that just with a click of a button. It's amazing. But the coolest thing is that you make it your own, and you bring so much life to the buildings that you draw and the people. And like if your goal was to make sure that they look real in the world that you created, you completely succeed, because these characters belong in their locations, and it's all dramatic and cool, and it's unlike any like Spider-Man comic I've read. Like you bring to it your own sensibilities that are just incredible. Do you have any who and I always try to, like every artist I work with, I try to pick out like who do they love? Who do they love? And can you talk to me about some of your artistic influences?
Yeah, of course. Funny enough, some of them also worked on the Spider-Verse movie. So, people like Justin K. Thompson and Rob Ruppel. Blanking out right now. There's another one.
Alberto Mialgo, right, is one of my who's incredible.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, Jim Mafu, they're incredible.
Yeah. So those guys, I've had a similar aesthetic to them. I love the work that they did before on Tron Legacy, which 3 people watched, including me. So those are the guys that I really enjoy their work. On a more personal level, I really like Miguel Covarrubias is like an old older Mexican illustrator. And Al Hirschfield is Al Hirschfield. If for anyone, not familiar, he's if you've watched Aladdin, the animated not Aladdin, all the characters that's his aesthetic, like the genie with the swirl, and so. And
there's a whole, and in the most recent Fantasia, they did a whole New York Al Hirschfeld inspired number in there that's incredible. And like in anyone watching, you might not know the name Al Hirschfeld, but you definitely seen the artwork. His cartooning. He used to do the front of every like Playbill magazine, or it would have like, you know, when you go to a Broadway show or something like that, he would do the drawing of it. But that's so amazing hearing you say that, because now that you say it, it makes complete sense. That's amazing.
So I tried to bring a little bit of that. I think looking back, I feel that some of the methods that I went in with, some of them really worked. Some of them, because of just the nature of comics. Sometimes they don't quite read as I intended, but it's all about trial and error. I'll get it next time, hopefully.
You did such a great job of it. The book looks so great. The characters look so great, and the action, so much character, and you and Justin work so well together, because like they're characters that are larger than life, and they're characters that are just perfect of life. And you guys hit in so many ways. You hit so many wonderful levels, and so I can't thank you enough for doing the work that you've done, and congratulate you enough for bringing this book baby into the world.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to segue over to Danny next. So Danny, thank you again so much for joining us. What was your first exposure? How did you fall in love with Miles Morales?
I was actually working at a comic shop when Miles was first announced. I was selling everybody those first appearances.
That's awesome. What was the shop?
Forbidden Planet in New York City.
Of course. Of course.
So I was actually kind of, from the second the news dropped, was kind of like experiencing that wave. I went back and read like all the death of Peter Parker stuff that led up to it. That funeral was probably one of the first comics that ever made me cry, to be perfectly honest. And when Miles first showed up, it was really emotional and important to me. For those in here who do read single issues, my best friend is Vida Ayala, who is Black and Puerto Rican. And so the two of us were like flipping out about like the existence of Miles at the time, because we met through working at Forbidden. But like, it's really funny for me, the moment that Miles clicked with me was not actually the media itself. It was when his first issue came out. Not his first appearance in Fallout, but like his first issue.
Ultimate Comics Spider-Man #1. Yeah.
So first of all, that opening scene with the lotto like has stuck with me as like, because that was my I was like a scholarship kid in private school, so like that was like my lived experience. Like that page was my life. But there was a dad and his son, African American, walked in, and I'm behind the register, and we're chatting, and the kid likes Spider-Man, but they didn't know about Miles yet, because not everyone who walks in, is like in on like the big news. And I turn to them and I'm like, oh hey, that like the new like Spidey is like a Black Latino, and like the kid gets really hyped, and like the dad gets like super emotional. Like I started like nearly crying, and he turned to his kid and I was like, honestly, Miles looks like your boy. And the dad turned and went, did you hear that? Spider-Man looks like you. Oh my God. And like, I still to this day, like get really teared up, because like being a brown kid from New York, like, and having that moment, also being able to give that moment to a kid, to have been able to like, I walked out from behind the register and handed that book to that boy. And like, I think about how important that is. I think about how there's a little kid who lives next in the apartment next door to me, who found out that I wrote a book with Miles in it, proceeded to go and grab every toy in his room, And that was why Miles mattered to me. I love that little dorky, snarky brat with all of my heart, but it's the fact that he matters so much to so many kids and so many adults. And every time he appears, be it the video games or the movies, it feels big because he feels real.
Yeah. That's amazing. What a story. I mean, and that opening scene is so powerful. I mean, I don't think I'm talking to a school that, like, I think one of the reasons that Miles exists is because there's this great documentary, Waiting for Superman, about charter schools and school lotteries and stuff like that. And I remember sitting in meetings, and Joe Quesada watched it, and I think Brian Michael Bendis at the same time was watching that, and they kind of came together with Axel Alonso and Sana Amanat and Mark Benicia, and they like, and it was like, there's something here, and that helped get, kind of get that ball rolling. But it is so powerful to have Miles, and it is so important, and that's why I mean, I can't believe it's been 10 years since that started happening, and to see that he's had a comic constantly going through that time, that he's also been in major comic book events, like he was in Secret Wars, which is now almost 8 years ago, I think, almost at this point. And now he's also one of the stars of Champions, which is a book that Danny writes. And for those who don't know, joining us from home today, like we're joining you from home. But Champions is a awesome comic written by Danny and drawn by Luciano Vecchio, and it stars the best teen heroes in the Marvel universe. And can you tell us a bit about the current storyline you're telling right now, Danny, and Miles' role in it?
Yeah, so we are kind of coming off the fallout of the amazing event Outlawed, which if you guys did not get to read that yet, first of all, you got it. It's so good. It's really nice to come on to
Eve Ewing. Eve L. Ewing wrote that, and oh shoot, I'm gonna kick myself. I'm blanking on the artist. Simone Del Mayo launched it, and it is incredible. So it launched in Outlawed, and it also had tie-ins in Miles Morales, and it had tie-ins in Champions, and then you took over Champions with issue 6. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. And so essentially, there's currently a law in place, supposedly with the intention of trying to protect teenagers by preventing them without, quote, proper mentorship from being heroes. And it essentially results in a near blanket ban on teen superheroes. And Champions and other teen heroes have kind of been like, no, what you're doing isn't helping us. It's not helping teens. It's not help. And the team in general went through a lot of really intense stuff because of the law. And one of the groups besides the government that was had a hand in what happened was Roxxon, the very large mega corporation, who is at the start of my run essentially trying to kind of revamp their image, to kind of clean it up after people, as the law kind of goes back to the Senate, because there's a lot of published pushback. But obviously the Champions are like, this smells funny. But there's only so much they can do when technically Roxxon isn't doing anything illegal. Mm-hmm. So when Roxxon starts a lot of outreach involving a social media app, Kamala decides that they're going to play a little dirty this time. And essentially a few of them end up interning at Roxxon to kind of investigate what's up. So a lot of out of costume stuff. I'm a big fan of, like, Leverage, White Collar, all those little, but not little, they're my life, like heist and con shows. And it was kind of really fun to kind of take that concept, but make it with these guys who are, just really delightful. And working with Luciano in particular, who has such a great sense of space and choreography, has been a delight. And Miles's particular role in this is he is one of the team members who ends up semi undercover as an intern.
It's
you know,
so
snooping
great.
around the offices. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just really wanted to do something where while there is still, you know, punching and flying and flipping, that the main villain, much like, you know, the main issue that you're reckoning with in Shockwaves is the disaster in Puerto Rico. In a similar way, I wanted to deal with something that you can't punch it, right? You can't punch a marketing plan. You can't punch, you know, the manipulations of social media and publicity. And that was, so it's kind of like, what do these kids who are battling being disenfranchised do?
Yeah. Well, and it feels so real, and it feels so real to as I see it, like what kids are going through today, and the difficulty of growing up in a social media a time when so much of your life is lived online, but it's a brilliant book, and it's got everything. It's got intrigue, it's got action. It's just delightful, and so thanks for doing great work on there. And Miles is so great in it. He is so himself. And
I got to make one of my favorite jokes I've ever made in a comic in that first issue.
Sure.
So I'm really bad at sound effects. Like, it is my writing weakness. I'm just the worst at it. So, but I sometimes Luciano and I, especially when doing combat, we'll go back and forth. So in that first issue in particular, Luciano took the lead on the opening combat. And I was just like, I just want a space for Miles to make a quip. I will figure out the quip when you're done drawing it. I just want that kind of space. And he drew this perfect moment for like a little zapping moment, like a zip. And then I ended up just turning that to Miles says, wait, did you just zit at me, the zit man? And then Nova gets to point out, did you call yourself the zit man? Is that a thing you just said? And because I'm not that strong with sound effects, getting to do a joke based around a sound effect inspired by like the really kind of funny facial expressions and body language that Luciano did in that first issue was like really fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Oh, thank you, Danny. All right, so I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, and then we're going to get to the questions of our wonderful attendees here of this panel. If you didn't know, there's a Q&A button that should be at the bottom of your screen. You can add questions. You can like questions that have already been asked. The more you like stuff, the higher it'll rise, and the more we'll likely see it. And so add that. So, all right, so I'm going to jump back to Justin briefly. So, Justin, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the first comic you've ever written?
My first comic that I ever wrote, actually, Nick, was in 5th grade. Shout out to Greg Wells.
I mean, how could we forget that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm a seasoned veteran. But if you want to say my first, traditionally published comic book / graphic novel, yes.
Is this the first comic you've been paid to write?
yes. Yeah, that's fair. That's also fair.
What was the transition from writing novels to comics like for you? Did you find it difficult, easy? What was that like for you?
I think before I started, I was like a little nervous just because, opposite of always, 90,000 words, early departures, 73,000 words, Shockwaves, 500 words. So it was kind of like, I was kind of a little like nervous about it. But once I got in the flow, I actually found it super liberating, because I remember the things that I loved about comics from the very beginning, which is that like the way you can manipulate time, and the way that you can like just jump right to the heart of the matter, and like how important dialogue is, and like just atmosphere. And so that was so exciting to like think about economy and think about what really will drive the scene home in this panel, so that if you only read this panel, like you could feel the kind of the resonance of the entire like emotional arc. So like that part was a lot. I had a lot of fun with it, and especially because I don't think I realized prior to this project that everything's kind of like written in essentially what amounts to a script. And so just kind of like seeing that and thinking about like all the people that we've been talking about and how everyone's kind of done their own version of that. And we all kind of end up at the same place, which is like we get to create this awesome story that has so much life, but also like so much meaning to so many different people. So yeah, this is it was, I thought it was awesome. Like I'm ready to do more graphic novels. Shout out to Marvel.
Awesome. Yeah. We have to get that going. Pablo, were there any things that surprised you as you were drawing this? Be it a character that you loved that you didn't expect to love, or a setting that you loved, or something that was really difficult to draw, really easy to draw? Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in the drawing of this book?
Yeah. So I don't know how much we can get into like story-wise, but there's two characters that you have two new characters that are villains-ish. I can't really nail them down. They're very like but they're very cool, and they ride a motorcycle, so automatically they're already like great. And one of them is so it's Vex and Trinity, and I really enjoy working on them a lot. Especially Vex. Was more or less based on my partner, so I feel like I'm outing her now, like putting that pressure on her. But so she very much looks like her. So the time that I was drawing her, I was like, snickering at this. I was like, yeah.
And I can't. Let's pause this for a second. I just want everyone in this world to know that you based like the villain, the super villain of this piece on your partner. Just want that to be clear.
Sounds like something I would do with my wife, and she would also be very happy. So,
yeah.
but also like to be fair to Pablo though. Like they're like evil, but they're not like extreme evil, right? So it's like
like
shout out to the partner. Yeah, light evil. Yeah, that's what we're doing for.
And I guess the other thing is, so my day job is I'm a background designer or background painter, depending on the show. So I love drawing backgrounds. Like I love that is my thing. And so when I started this, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna draw every background in every panel. And of course, that completely backfired on me. Really, eventually it did.
It is.
But
yeah, backgrounds end up being every comic book artist's bane of their existence. Some of it's a labor of love, but it's because everyone doesn't realize, like, if you have 6 panels on a page and you're like, I'm going to commit to drawing 6 different backgrounds, it's so hard.
It was a lot, yeah. But in the beginning, I did try it. I did power through a lot of it. But eventually it just started getting me. But it's not, I don't hate it. I absolutely love them. That is like I always joke that, if I could just get away with making this book with no characters and just backgrounds, it would have been nice. But yeah, no, that was.
Now I'm just going to be thinking about how to do that now. I'm just going to be like, have a notebook full of ideas.
Well, Danny, we'll do. You can write it, or what do you? And it'll be the Daily Bugle, but it's not based around the people who work at the newspaper. It's like the building, the Daily Bugle, like.
Just the building. If these walls could talk.
It reminds me of one of my favorite issues. I never remember what the number is because I read it originally in like that Ultimate Spider-Man compilation that they did of crossovers. And it's the issue where Peter Parker goes to for the internship at the Baxter Building. And he goes up the escalator and the building goes, "Welcome, Spider-Man." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And it's because the building scanned his backpack. And he's like, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about."
I think that's Ultimate Marvel Team Up. It might even be number 1.
Yes.
Yeah, it's such a great book. It's such a great book. Oh, that's great. I've forgotten that scene. I love that book. I worked on later issues of that one too. But that's so cool. And Pablo, I mean, the work you do is incredible on there. and the building, and the buildings, but the characters, it's all so great. So I mean, everyone, what you have coming in the mail for you in 1 to 2 weeks, you are in for such a treat if you haven't already gotten it. And then also, if you look in the chat, some of our wonderful Barnes and Noble friends, who I didn't thank at the beginning, where I probably should have. Thank you, Barnes and Noble, for hosting us tonight on this as well. But they shared a link with a link to some preview art. If you scroll up, you'd see that Naomi, one of our wonderful Barnes and Noble friends, posted a link of an excerpt from Shockwaves that is in there. And so that's awesome. All right, so before we jump into our fan Q&A, because I think I've let us talk too much, and we'll get back there. Is there anything that you want to share with the people watching here before we dive into the Q&A? Any of you panelists?
I just want to tell Pablo, I know you were talking about feeling like a tourist, but as someone who was born and raised in New York, you've got that vibe in that book. Like, it is very easy, or it's not very easy, because there are a lot of people have obviously done it successfully, but sometimes you get an artist, or like doing New York, and there's the difference between understanding the energy and seeing the energy, and like you got the vibe. So I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, so let's dive into the Q&A. So one of our most liked ones, I'll direct this one to Justin. The question is, will Prowler or Miles' uncle be an important part of this book?
Sorry to say no.
Yeah, but there are other family members of his as well.
But there are other, and also the other cool thing that I will say is that we got to kind of create even more of like Miles' extended family. So like especially on his mom's side, which was kind of cool to kind of bring in other people and dive into that rich history. So there's definitely plenty of family representation in Shockwaves.
Absolutely. And for those of you who do want some Prowler, Uncle Aaron Davis, you can look at the Miles Morales comic book, a recent volume he was all over, written by Saladin Ahmed, drawn by Javier Garrón and Carmen Carnero, and in a bunch of incredible artists as well on there. But yeah, but Uncle Aaron is not in this book, but who knows? Everyone keep on reading. So one of the other questions that everyone wants to know is this book an origin story? Justin, you want to take this one away too?
So like yes and no. It does kind of take us back a little bit earlier into Miles' kind of formative years. And that was kind of one of the cool things about it, is that we kind of get to see Miles kind of work on the job training, like he's trying to figure things out. And that's a thing that I really enjoyed about it, was that Miles is not always successful, but like not even in the typical like, oh, superhero failed act one kind of way, but like just the little things along the way where he's like, okay, I'm not as good at this thing, I need to improve in this. And so you kind of get to live that experience with him the same way that any of us feel when we're going to a new school or a new job. And so yeah, that it's not an origin story in that way, but there is, like I said, a lot of the history that's happening like in Puerto Rico. So we do get some of the origin, and about and a big part of it is like Rio telling us all these kind of rich stories about her family life and what it was like growing up on the island. So yeah,
you definitely do learn things about Miles that you haven't learned elsewhere in Miles comics. So I mean, those of you who are looking for a rich experience of Miles, definitely pick up Shockwaves. Okay, there's a question for Pablo. What did you do to help make this? Is from Henry Davis. I didn't name check the other question askers. That's amateur hour over here. The first one, did I lose it already now? I think I did. Well, we'll try to. Oh, it's an answer question. I can figure this out. That was from Gabriel S1. Gabriel asked both those two. Oh man, I even gave Gabriel two answers. I didn't name check them. Anyway, back to this one. Henry Davis asks Pablo, what did you do to help make the panels of this comic dynamic? Is it a sort of practice makes perfect thing, or are there tips and tricks to making the panels pop off the page?
It's both, really. There's no easy way around it. You kind of have to put, when people talk about the 10,000 hours into this, it's true. it's a matter of what you do with the 2,000 hours. You can't just do like, draw, because then, you're gonna end up injured. So, but,
buddy.
but,
Writing too.
Buddy.
So I've, if you can help me, because I'm really terrible with names, but because comics for me are fairly new. It's a fairly new medium. I'm mostly illustrator. So, first of all, thank you that you think they're dynamic. I mostly just look at what, there was a trade for Miles when everything was merged into the one universe. I don't remember the name.
Secret Wars. That's in Secret
So,
Wars.
so post that, it's when he fights Darkheart for a little bit.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
it the Spider-Man stuff as well?
Yeah, it's so yeah. When Miles came to the Marvel Universe proper, that was in Spider-Man. It was just the word Spider-Man. Brian Michael Bendis, Sarah Pichelli launched that one. Yeah, and Darkheart, who is the son. I guess son is probably not the demon spawn of Mephisto, if I recall correctly. Blackheart.
Yes.
Blackheart, not Darkheart.
Yes.
Blackheart. Thank
Sorry.
you, Gabriel. Gabriel telling an editor. That's really embarrassing. Thank you, Gabriel. But yeah, but Blackheart.
So I read that comic, and that comic had so much, like, it was just scream in your face kind of action, and so that was for a lot of it. For me, that was like the point of reference, because I thought that was super well done, and I don't want to copy what they did, of course, but I definitely had that in mind.
Well, you can't go wrong with Sarah Pichelli and Justin Ponzer coloring. Sarah is an absolute legend and a wonderful person and co-creator of Miles, and she knows what she's doing.
Yeah. So I guess to sum it up is, it takes time and it takes effort and it takes practice, but also look at what everyone, like the top people in their field, look at what they're doing, and kind of try to match it, but don't injure yourself, because it will take you out. It's better to take breaks than to be forced to take a break.
Oh man. Oh, Pablo. Oh, okay. So one of the other questions I got in there is, it starts as a question for Danny, and then I think we'll try to do a quick once around, because we're actually almost running out of time here. But it is, Danny, how did you break into comics?
The answer is I was really fortunate to be working at Forbidden Planet alongside several of the current comic greats. It was me, it was Vida Ayala, it was Matt Rosenberg, Tyler Boss, and I had always written, like, since I was a child, and I read a lot of comics, but I didn't see an in initially. Like, it didn't seem something that was possible, and then I ended up meeting my best friend V, and watched and learned a lot while I was at the comic shop, listening to people and being like, oh, that issue of something got published, can I read your script? Can I do this? And then just very, quietly and pleasantly being like, yo, I'm just gonna, hang with friends at conventions, not embarrass my friends at conventions. But the biggest thing that I learned was Matt Rosenberg was like, I can introduce you to anybody, but if you're not ready to pitch, it doesn't matter. And so I kept stories in my back pocket. And then I was working on short stories, publishing short stories. So I had that kind of stuff as samples. Got into freelance indie comic editing before I actually had any books on the shelf. So I was fortunate enough to meet a lot of co-creators like that. And then that kind of if you stay ready kind of moment where I was fortunate enough to meet an editor, and I got rejected for a while. Like I was on hold with several people for creator-owned stuff for a year and a half, 2 years when I started actually looking.
Yeah.
But then when I was working on a new pitch at one point, I noticed that an editor, Adrian Wassel over at Vault, who I had met via editing together, was liking tweets whenever I said I was working. So I literally was like, I'm gonna shoot my shot. And I emailed him and I was like, yo, I see that you see that I'm working. Can I send you a pitch? But it was also that situation where I only did it because I had talked to him already.
Mhm.
He was responding, to evidence that I was working. I never would have done this otherwise, but I did it, and he was like, yeah, send it to me. And I sent him a couple of ideas, and that's how Queen of Bad Dreams happened.
That's awesome.
And then from there, Vita and I kind of spun stories together all the time in our free time. So we started co-writing. My first thing with Marvel was actually Ironheart 2020 with Vita.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, I mean, and what it sounds like, one, is that you just worked your butt off. I mean, you just worked and worked and worked, and you made stuff before anyone told you could. That's like something I'm hearing. Justin, how did you get into your writing? How did you make your break there?
Just like Danny, I it's kind of through a lot of perseverance, I guess. I wrote a couple manuscripts prior to Opposite of Always, which was my debut novel, and got lots and lots of rejections, to the point now, like, I actually am really thankful for that time, because one, it really pushed me to ask myself, like, is this really what I want to do? Because if so, you're not going to let someone's no stop you from doing the thing that you love. And I think, honestly, especially when I talk to kids, I say, like, you don't have to be the most talented person in the world. I'm definitely not. I'm not the most talented writer. I have lots of friends who are far more talented than I am. But if you have perseverance and some talent, of course, you need a little talent. If you have perseverance and you're deciding that you're going to continue to work on your craft, and you're going to get better and better, and you're going to read widely, and you're going to challenge yourself and push yourself, then I think that you can get to the place where you feel happy about your work. And then when you feel happy about your work, when you're excited about it, a lot of times that translates into the real world. It may take some time to get there. I hope that anyone listening who has those kind of aspirations, it doesn't take as long as it took me. But it's worth it, and I wouldn't change it. And I think now it's really steeled me, so I don't, like, rejection doesn't bother me the same way that maybe it did 10 years ago, because it's like I've heard so many no's. All you really are looking for is that one yes. And truly, I don't want anyone to kind of give me a half yes, because then that means that when things get rough, they're not going to be there, right, to support the product. But if they truly believe it in their heart, and they believe in your voice, which is the one thing that you can bring to the table that no one else has, is your voice, your point of view, then you're in good hands. You're in good shape for a long time.
That's awesome. Pablo,
also, learning how to deal with critique. For me, that was harder than rejection, right? A no, it's done, you move on to the next one. But learning not only how to take critique notes and being open to them, responding to them professionally, but also knowing the heart of them, and knowing when they mean, yeah, this is something I need to change, or this is not where I need to be getting critique from. Learning that as a writer, instead of, as a creator in general, is really hard. And getting critique every time you turn something in is hard.
Yeah. That's also part of the job, part of like that, that you got to be able to take that and hear what you need to hear from it. That's a really great thought there, Danny. Pablo, how did you break into animation and start doing comics and all that stuff? What was your path?
Oh man. So I grew up in Maryland, DC, but I had a friend that he broke into the Atlanta animation area, I guess. Everything that's to do with Archer, like a more adult animation. So he was like, hey, we're looking for painters, and I was like, yeah, why not? So that's where I got my start. It was a little rough. It was a very, very high pace kind of job, and I actually learned. When it comes to critiques, it's sort of been nailed into me. I have no problems with notes, critiques, nothing. Like people can tear it apart. I want to be like, okay, but I think it was just because of a different work environment that I have, like, and just where I am now, and especially now, like, everyone has a hand in what we're doing, so it's always like you're never gonna have the final say. So when I was working there, then I got into comics because there was a lot going on. Like I don't want to go into the super details, but there was a lot going on in the world that I didn't like, and I was like, I can't do anything in animation with this, but I feel like I can write comics about this. And and that's how the journey began. The comic that where I talk about Latin American issues, and two people read it, but it was enough for like because it was enough that one person was good enough for it to share it, and it got nominated. But
three people, Pablo. Three people.
Oh yeah, thank you. I have a friend that. What he has taught me is that to take rejection and just use that as a fuel. And ever since I started like just doing that, just being like, I don't want to say, because it sounds like saying work with like pettiness and like fuel that. No, it's more about like use that rejection energy and put it into something to make it better. And that's what I've been that's what I've been at least trying to achieve.
That's great. Yeah, you gotta channel that energy somewhere, and so putting it into your work is a great way to do it. That's awesome. I mean, it just goes to show all you're talking about is that, like, what everyone needs to understand is that it sounds like it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of not waiting for people to give you permission to be what you want to be, right? Just start doing the thing that you want to do on your own, and people will notice and give it to everyone, and like, go out there. But that's awesome. Okay, so let's see. I think we got time for maybe a couple more questions. I think I think it's past 8 o'clock, so we're probably technically out of time, but I think we should at least try. Let's see what we can do on here for if there are any other ones that can come up here. Let's see. I'm sorry about let's take a quick talk about, like, somebody asked here. Lexa Patman asked, how did everyone develop their own unique writing art style? And I think one of the ways, can you talk about, maybe as a recommendation, books that were influential to you and how they influenced how you do what you do, in case it'll help someone find something that you love and find something that they love. Does that make sense? like for me, like when I the X-Men cartoon in the 90s was one of the things that was huge to pushing me into loving comics. And I broke my arm in 7th grade. My brother gave me some X-Men comics, and that was my biggest gateway to becoming a lifelong comic book nerd, and then pursuing work there. But those are hugely influential. And then reading like V for Vendetta was like another one that was like a shot across the bow. Like, comics can be so much, and that's kind of like, so my Venn diagram of what I always try to do as an editor of comics is like, what's the place between the X-Men 90s cartoon and V for Vendetta? Is always the try there. Like, Justin, what were some influential books for you that things that you read that made you want to be a writer and influenced how you write now?
Oh man, it's where do we start? I mean, there are like a lot of books that I read that had, for me, like anything that has kind of an emotional resonance to it, first and foremost, is the thing that I'm typically drawn to. And so I read pretty widely from the Mixed Up Files to yeah. I mean, read all of
I had a bad pact.
yes, thank you. I was actually just talking about like even a lot of the picture books that I loved growing up, like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Alexander's No Good,
Terrible, very
very
good
bad.
notes, very bad.
Oh,
things.
yes, thank you for that. Yeah, all those, and I think just about like storytelling, and ultimately what I learned is that one, always keep working, even when you're waiting for feedback or you're waiting for someone to say whatever they say about the project you did. Like keep working on the next thing, and then also just read widely, especially things that you would not normally be drawn to, just like by nature. Maybe it's a different genre than what you normally love. And then ask the people who love that genre, what's the best thing? Like if what would you do to make me fall in love with this genre? And then read those books and see why they work so well.
Yeah.
Why they were printed. And then try to incorporate all those lessons. And what you're really doing when you start to read widely is you're really cultivating your own taste, right? And then like that will translate into your voice, like your narrative voice and how you hear and process information, and then put yourself on the page. I think in the beginning, a lot of times I was like imitating people that I liked because that's like, oh, like it worked, right? Like I want to be like this person. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think in the end, where you really start to kind of take off with your own work is that when you start to trust the quality of your own voice, and when you start to see the world and you have your own kind of narrative point of view.
That's awesome. Pablo, do you want to talk about what, like you've talked about some of your artistic influences, but talk about some other comics that influenced you and set you on their way, maybe as a recommendation for people watching this?
Yeah. I think on a technical level, there's a book called Dream Worlds. It's by this old school artist from Disney. He worked on Mulan and all that stuff. He's a very gruff old man now, but you know, all of his like I said, on a technical level, everything that he talks about is on point. Every time I read it, I reread it. I get something new. On the more comics level, I this might sound a little basic, but Mouse and Persepolis were for me like my, that's where I started with me.
But people may not have read those. People may not have read. So Mouse, Art Spiegelman, Persepolis by
Marjorie Sarafi.
Marjorie Sarafi. Thank you very much, Danny.
And I think I recently read They Call Us the Enemy. That was like really powerful. And this one might be a little the last one, but this is a little of the original Astro Boy manga. It's surprisingly, because you look at it, it's like, it's Astro Boy, it's pretty cute, and it gets really deep into like, humanity's like moral issues, and it's just like, whoa, this is heavy. So, but it was, I don't know, like the first time I picked it up, I was like, wow, this is a lot. So that's one.
Yeah, you're not the first artist who's mentioned that as well to me. Dustin Weaver talked about that because I was super into Pluto, which is ultimate Astro Boy, and it's so great if you haven't read that. But I dug back and read a little of that classic Astro Boy. It's incredible. Danny, you want to talk about a little bit about your influences and the ones that kind of set you rolling?
So the first ever comic I read was somebody misfiled books of magic into the children's section of the library. So I read my very first comics were Vertigo comics, like the wild 80s British stuff. And from that point on, I was a John Constantine fanatic, and I still am to this day.
That's awesome.
But growing up, read a lot of Diane M. Duane. So You Want to Be a Wizard, the books of magic stuff. I learned a lot about writing through imitation. intentional intimidation. No, I've never been intimidating. Imitation. So like, I'm a huge Fight Club nerd, and I can pull out a pretty solid Chuck Palahniuk voice via prose. Like, so that William Gibson, Neuromancer's all-time favorite novel, Starship Troopers growing up, also still a huge influence on me. But actually, a few years ago, about 6 to 8 months before my first short story was ever published, so before I got into comics, I kind of had this line was drawn where it was no longer about writing. Like, those got me to write, made me inspired to read. But then I discovered Victor Laval's Ballad of Black Tom and Daniel Jose Older's Shadow Shaper trilogy. And those were the books that made me realize I could write like me. That worlds of fantasy and horror and everything could deal with more contemporary stories that looked like my world, that looked like Harlem, that looked like the Bronx. And that really kind of changed the game for me, and really altered how I thought about work. So then I had, this love of like superheroes, and I was like, I want to promise myself that when I write them, I write them in my world, I guess, in a world that looks like the ones that my cousins grew up in. And not to be a giant nerd, but if you're looking for a really good, like, kind of inspiration and thought about how to write in your own voice, the novel Craft in the Real World has kind of been fueling me for the past like month and a half, 2 months. It's written by a man who runs writing workshops, but talks about how writing workshops tend to be very specifically for, late 20s, middle class straight white men, and how because of that we've decided that the word craft means something very specific, and have removed the sense of culture from it. And so he talks about learning to reevaluate your work and how you think of process, without erasing yourself from it, and without writing workshops kind of making you write, like, I guess, the majority voice. And he talks about what vulnerability looks like when you are a marginalized writer, all the things that we think of as craft and how they're connected to culture. And I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to write, who would find Shockwaves interesting, who heard me talking about Champions and thought it was interesting, because I learned, it's one of those moments where you're like, man, I read that in the past 2 months and I still have so much to learn. If like a book, like a craft book, hits you that hard.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those are all great recommendations, everyone. Thank you so much. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're over time, so we should probably wrap this up. I want to thank our panelists, Danny Lohr. Thank you so much. Pablo Leon, thank you so much. Justin Reynolds, thank you so much. And everyone, go check out. I think everyone can be found with a quick search on social media. One thing you'll want to look for in Justin's is he went to pick up his book. And did you or did you not go as Miles Morales in costume?
Yes, I have a full Miles Morales costume that I was actually like about to break it out again, but I was like, I don't want to overdo it here, so maybe soon.
That's wonderful. Well, the closest I could get, I don't have a full Miles Morales costume, but I wore this tie not because I like being, well, I do like wearing ties, stuff like that, but this is my secret Spider-Man tie. There we go. So it's got this, and it's my kind of like Milesy one because it's the closest to his colors. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Barnes and Noble, for doing that, for bringing us all together tonight and sharing us with everybody. And I also want to give big shout outs to, they couldn't be here tonight with us, Lauren Bissam and Caitlin O'Connell, who edited the book at Marvel. Everyone, you have to go pick up Miles Morales Shockwaves. I mean, everyone watching this, I think, but your ticket included buying this. But like, tell your friends and tell everyone. And
Y'all
then
got
let us all
nieces
know.
and nephews.
It's true. It's true. But I hope you all enjoy it. And thank you all for joining us so much tonight. This has been so fun. And panelists, I hope to talk to you all very soon, because I had a great time doing this. And I want to, Justin, I want to talk to you about, maybe let's find a way to hang out in Cleveland sometime.
Let's do it. Like you'll be surprised to see what's happening on West 25th right now.
I'm
It's
stoked.
pretty wild.
I'm stoked.
But no, also thank you, Nick and Danny and Pablo, for letting me chat with you all.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Good night, everyone.